I'm sorry I couldn't save you. I'm so sorry." The words floated across the misty cemetery, broken by quiet sobs. Dawson stood 30 feet away, white chrysanthemums clutched in his hand, frozen by the rawness in that young woman's voice. She knelt before a simple granite headstone, a toddler sleeping against her shoulder, her frame thin beneath a worn cardigan that had seen too many winters. He'd come to visit Natalie's grave, as he did every Thursday morning before the world woke up. 3 years had passed since the accident, but the grief still felt fresh, like a wound that refused to close. The cemetery was usually empty at dawn, a solitude he'd come to need. But today, someone else was here, someone crying at his wife's grave. Dawson approached slowly, his expensive shoes soundless on the damp grass. The woman didn't notice him until his shadow fell across the headstone. She looked up, startled, tears streaking her pale cheeks. She couldn't have been more than 27, with exhausted eyes that held too much sorrow for someone so young. "I'm sorry," she whispered, starting to rise. "I didn't mean to. I'll go." "Wait." Dawson's voice was gentle. He looked down at the headstone bearing his wife's name, Natalie Ann Chambers, beloved soul, gone too soon. "That's my wife's grave. I don't mean to intrude, but what's your story?" The woman stilled, her arms tightening around the sleeping child. She looked at the flowers in his hand, then back at the headstone, confusion and pain mingling in her expression. "I didn't know her, not really, but she saved my daughter's life." The November wind moved through the oak trees, scattering leaves across the cemetery paths. Dawson felt his heart constrict. "Tell me," he said softly. "Her name was Piper," she explained, "and the little girl was her daughter, June, now 2.5 years old. 3 years ago, Piper had been 24, homeless, and 8 months pregnant. She'd been sleeping in her car outside a grocery store when she went into premature labor. I was so scared. It was the middle of the night. I didn't have a phone, no money. I tried to get to the store entrance to call for help, but I collapsed in the parking lot. I paused there, wiping my eyes with the back of my hand. Your wife found me. She was leaving late from her shift at the hospital. She stayed with me, held my hand, called the ambulance. She rode with me, stayed through the whole delivery, even though she didn't know me." Dawson's throat tightened. That was Natalie, always the first to help, the last to leave someone in need. "June was so small, just over 3 pounds. I had complications, lost a lot of blood. I was in the hospital for 10 days, and your wife? She came every single day. She brought clothes for June, supplies I couldn't afford. She advocated for me with the social workers." Piper's voice cracked. "I never even got to thank her properly. By the time I was stable enough to find her again, I heard about the accident." Dawson closed his eyes. Natalie had never mentioned any of this. She had kept so many of her kindnesses private, believing they were simply what anyone should do. "The nurses told me which cemetery. I've been coming here every month since, trying to tell her thank you. Tell her that June is growing, that we're surviving. Barely, but we're here because of her." "You're homeless?" Dawson asked quietly. Piper nodded, shame coloring her features. "I work 2 part-time jobs, but childcare costs more than I make. We've been staying at a shelter, but there's a waiting list for everything. I'm trying, I really am, but it's like running in place." Dawson looked at this young mother, at the child his wife had helped bring into the world, and felt something shift inside him. For 3 years he'd been lost in grief, going through the motions of living while his company ran itself, while his empty house echoed with silence. My wife believed that kindness should continue beyond us, that helping one person could create ripples we'd never see. He paused. I've been so focused on losing her that I forgot to honor how she lived. Over the following weeks, something unexpected unfolded. Dawson offered Piper a job as his personal assistant, work she could do partly from home with flexible hours. He helped her find affordable childcare and connected her with a program that provided housing assistance. It wasn't charity, he insisted. It was paying forward what Natalie had started. But as Piper settled into the work, managing his schedule and correspondence with surprising skill, Dawson discovered something that shifted everything. One evening, as she was leaving the office he'd set up for her in his home, he noticed a faded photograph slip from her bag. He picked it up, and his breath caught. It was Natalie, much younger, maybe 19, standing beside a teenage girl with blonde hair. "Where did you get this?" he asked, his voice strange. Piper turned, her face draining of color. She took the photo with shaking hands. "I should have told you. I wanted to tell you, but I didn't know how, and I was afraid you'd think I was manipulating you. Piper, where did you get that photograph?" She sank into a chair, June playing with blocks nearby. "Natalie was my foster sister. For 2 years when I was 14 and 15. The Hendersons, that was the family. Natalie was their biological daughter, home from college for summers. She was the only person in that house who treated me like I mattered." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "When I aged out of the system at 18, I lost touch with everyone. I was too ashamed of how my life turned out to reach out. When she found me that night in the parking lot, she didn't recognize me at first. I'd changed so much. But later in the hospital, she realized who I was." Dawson felt the revelation settle over him. She knew. She never said anything directly, but the way she looked at me, the things she said, she knew. And she helped me anyway, even after everything. After all the years I'd been too proud to ask for help, she still showed up. The second revelation came a month later, when Dawson's lawyer called about Natalie's estate. There were documents Dawson had never seen, filed separately. A trust fund, established in Piper's name, funded by Natalie's personal savings, meant to mature when June turned 5. She'd set it up 3 weeks before the accident, the lawyer explained. Instructions specified it was for housing security and education. She'd never told Dawson because she wanted to surprise him once everything was finalized. When Dawson shared this with Piper, she collapsed into sobs. "She was still taking care of me, even after." "She was taking care of both of you, because that's who she was." They sat in his living room, June playing between them, the afternoon light soft through the windows. Dawson thought about the 3 years he'd spent locked in grief, isolated, convinced his purpose had died with Natalie. "I've been doing this wrong," he said finally, "mourning her by stopping. But she never stopped. Even when it was hard, even when it hurt, she kept showing up for people." Piper looked at him, understanding passing between them. "We could honor her together. Keep going." And they did. Slowly, Dawson reopened his heart to the world. He established a foundation in Natalie's name, focusing on supporting young mothers in crisis. Piper helped run it, her own experiences providing insight and empathy. June grew, bright and curious, surrounded by love she'd almost never known. 2 years later, on a Thursday morning, They stood together at Natalie's grave, white chrysanthemums in hand. June, now 4, placed a dandelion she'd picked on the headstone. "Tell Natalie thank you," Piper whispered to her daughter. "Thank you," June said solemnly, touching the cold stone. Dawson knelt beside the little girl. "You know what? Natalie would love knowing that her kindness grew into something bigger, that it's still spreading, touching more lives." Piper's voice was soft but steady. "I used to think I'd never repay what she did for me, but I realize now, you don't repay kindness, you pass it forward. You become it."
"She taught us both that," Dawson agreed. He stood, taking June's small hand. "Some people come into our lives for a moment and change everything. Natalie was that person for both of us." As they walked back through the cemetery, fallen leaves crunching beneath their feet, Dawson felt something he hadn't experienced in years: purpose. Not the desperate, grasping purpose of trying to hold on to the past, but the quiet, steady purpose of continuing a legacy. "Piper," he said as they reached the parking lot, "I've been thinking about expanding the foundation, opening a residential program for mothers and children. I'd need someone to help design it, someone who understands what it's really like." She looked at him, hope and gratitude shining in her eyes. "I'd be honored." June tugged on Dawson's jacket. "Mr. Dawson, are you sad?" He smiled, genuine warmth flooding through him. "No, sweetheart. I'm not sad anymore. I'm grateful." Because Natalie had shown him, even in death, that love doesn't end. It transforms. It becomes the kindness we show to strangers, the second chances we offer, the hands we extend to those who've fallen. Every act of grace becomes a continuation of every act before it, an endless chain of human connection that death cannot break. True kindness never dies. It lives on in every life it touches, multiplying in ways we may never witness. When we honor those we've lost by carrying forward their compassion, we discover that love is not something we had, it's something we become. And in becoming it, we find that grief can transform into purpose and loss into legacy.